Okay. Hello. Hi, friends. We are thrilled to be here for Club Chicxulub Part 2. Thank you guys for coming. So I wanted to share something of note. It's been very dark lately, as we know, but that's also part of why we decided to do this series. And so there's something I wanted to share. So back in 1990, Voyager 1 was coasting past Saturn, and somebody named Carl Sagan said, why don't you turn around and take a picture of the Earth as you coast past Saturn? And so they did. And what they saw was in one ray of light, a little tiny blue pixel, just one pixel. And so this is what Carl Sagan wrote about that, and I wanted to share it with us before we have a toast. Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor, explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint, every sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely indistinguishable inhabitants of the other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this pale point of light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity and our vastness, there's no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There's nowhere else, at least not in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, Earth is where we make our stand. It's been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores the responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. I can't add a whole lot to that. All I could say is that I have lived my life like a hedonist, a bit, and I've been very skeptical. Cynicism is very easy in times like right now. It is easy to slip into cynicism and say, it is so dark, we're not coming back. But the thing that has never changed for me, no matter what has happened, is I will always believe in love. I will always believe in love. That is why we're here. That is why we chase art. That is why we chase beauty. That's why we chase pleasure. 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 My pleasure. Plaisir. And that is why we find companionship with each other. And so I want to raise a toast and say, love will survive this moment. Love will survive this moment. Where is my drink? I'll be right back. Oh, Lord. Love will survive this moment. Thank you, and salute. Welcome to Club Chicxulub.
They called him the Turtle on account of his affliction. But Itzhak had come to feel more like a cannonball shot by his mother straight into the decks of San Francisco. He simply moved through the world, and like any cannonball, he was baffled by the damage that splintered everywhere, all around him. Since moving here last year in the early days of the gold rush, among the hundreds of thousands of new arrivals from every country on Earth, Itzhak had come to suspect that his only talent was making clothes that unmade themselves when wet, and it was always wet here. People often mistook his sleepy smile for cunning. He'd grown tall on the slow wagon trail west. Itzhak sometimes thought his balance had forgetfully wandered off back in Kansas. He fell out of windows. He'd fallen off the piers 4 times. He slipped on oil, fish guts, wet wood, anything at all. Itzhak picked his way up the tangle of Commercial Street, bearing an oversized sack for his mother's shop. He took a step and felt his right leg ooze deep into a pocket of mud. By the rank smell, something dead had stopped his descent. He tested the dead thing with the tip of his boot. It was spongy, with a bit of give. He gave it a silent blessing. There'd been so much rain in San Francisco lately, and the sandy canyons had become traps several feet deep, strewn with anything people could scavenge in an effort to keep wagons and horses from disappearing into the muck. With a sucking squish, Itzhak levered his leg free and sighed. The next stretch of road was the worst. Barrel staves, broken wheels, damaged crates. And then there were the abandoned machines for extracting gold. Ornate, massive, impossible things with gears and pulleys rusting now in the mud. Rich men had sailed these things clean around the world, only to be informed the contraptions would never work. Itzhak thought it clever that the great machines had found their true purpose as jagged flagstones. He stumbled, scraped an ankle on the exposed metal, and pushed forward. What Itzhak wanted was to scratch an itch, right at the tender cracked space where his skin met his new, craggy shell. He tried not to be self-conscious in public. When he'd come down with Argo fever, his skin had popped and crackled like fat in a skillet, and over the course of 3 agonizing days, his shoulders and arms had thickened. Finally, late at night, Itzhak's chest had crunched as if all the bones in his body had relocated there. He had cried out one last time, and then he watched affection fade entirely from his mother's face. Mama had insisted he hide the deformity of his chitinous chest, his plated back, and the fat nub of his tail. It's bad for business, she had said. But the massive coat, like a square mast of a ship, fooled no one. He wondered what his recent transformation meant. He thrummed a thumb on the low ridge that began at the nape of his neck like a young mountain range. A customer the other day said Argo fever was a divine curse on heathen and the venal, but he had to admit that God seemed to have afflicted folk in a most democratic manner. If there was a purpose to the sickness, it was bigger than Itzhak could figure. All at once, his foot wedged under something thick, hidden under the mud, and Itzhak fell. He had perfected the art of falling. He toppled slow and long and face first, but with dignity, like a great tree, acknowledging the inevitable. Someone shouted for him to stay put, others called him home. Men began to lay bets on the outcome. No one climbed down to help him out. He heard and then he saw the fire wagon rattle directly toward him. It was yoked to a team of powerful horses. He felt their hot breath and the drum of the hoof's soil. The wagon came and the driver swerved, but Itzhak knew there was nothing for it. He braced himself. He gathered the sack into his arms like a pillow, protecting his mother's goods as best he could, and then the horses were everywhere around his head. The stamping rattle and the tang of shit and a weight that made it nearly impossible to breathe. And then it was past. The wagon groaned in the distance. All that was left was a young man, cocooned in safe, swampy earth. Someone cheered and collected his winnings from several others. Itzhak's goods were ruined, but he plucked the pieces one by one and continued home. Itzhak and his mother rented a tent on Pacific and sold clothes to would-be miners. Itzhak thought the prices were outrageous, but Mama said they were in a golden age of speculation. She charged $97 for rubber-dipped boots. Those specialty boots melted in summer and they cracked in the very first frost. Mama had a deep and profound faith in the vanity of young men. She had found they would pay a premium when something magnified their potential for greatness. Gold seekers often thought themselves too clever for shops. And so Mama had an arrangement with a recently retired army captain, a gambler so inveterate, he was above petty concerns like profit. When a new ship anchored, the captain often happened to be unloading an open crate of Mama's Amazonian rubber mining boots. "These are meant for others," he would say to new arrivals with a wink, "but I'll let you have a pair for a song." Itzhak was looking forward to cabbage soup and clean clothes, but Mama blocked the shop door. She was the tallest 5-foot woman he had ever met. "Collect the captain," she said. "This week's cut is overdue." Itzhak dropped the filthy goods. "Perhaps he left town?" he offered. She cleared her throat, which was Mama's way of signaling foolishness. "That man," she said, "that man is allergic to hard work and a lack of women. No, my money's disappearing among the card sharps and the oyster girls at Portsmouth Square." Tonight at dusk, Itzhak was sent back out to get what was theirs. Soon he could see the lights of the square ahead. It made gamblers of everyone. In Topeka, he'd been warned of the evils of the vice, the great moral corruption of cards. Here, running a gambling house was the most respectable thing you could do. Gentlemen from well-heeled homes were frantic for roulette and faro, for luck and escape, at a pace Itzhak had never thought possible. To the north, east, and south sides of the old Mexican plaza, he searched for the captain among the many thousands of men, but finding him would take time. Nearly every building and most side streets offered games of chance. To the west sat a low adobe hut, with one preacher, vigilant and sad, and utterly ignored. At the Empire, Itzhak made his way through a thicket of miners, their new boiled shirts propping them up against the whiskey. They clustered around rectangles of Rouge et Noir and 21. In a cordoned-off corner, a photographer was doing a brisk trade at her new portrait studio. An enormous sign advertised the double novelty, daguerreotypes, taken by a lady. It seemed like a miraculous process to Itzhak. The photographer emerged from her inky black darkroom bearing a box with prepared silver plate like a holy object. She told the men to hold still while she exposed the lens, and Itzhak watched the would-be miners vibrate with the urge to shift, to move, to try all the things unfolding all around them all at once. At La Sociedad, men seemed to hurtle from one table to another. A Frenchman crashed into Itzhak's chest and demanded a game of poker. "Game slow as shit," said another man, squeezing past. Itzhak followed music into the back, on a raised platform with bunting and streamers and a guard to keep the drunks away. The band performed while gold and silver coins were thrown at their heads. He wondered if the performers were allowed to rest. At the arcade, a man surged out the door, tossed by the swell of the crowd. He caromed off Itzhak's plated back and staggered sideways. The man strained to focus, and Itzhak tried to steady him. He had a cluster of diamonds pinned to a ragged collar. "Brother," the man shouted. "Bro! Bro!" The man offered a terrifying smile, a mouthful of new teeth, solid gold plate. "Had the doctor pull all the originals," he said. He pawed at Itzhak's coat, trying to peer beneath. "One of them freaks, bro? Show me." The man with the gold teeth wanted to see Itzhak's affliction. And though he said it with admiration, Itzhak pulled his coat tight. Some drunks were like the muddy streets. If you weren't careful, there was no getting free. The saloon coughed out another dozen dazed men, and Itzhak hustled to one last place. The El Dorado was a blur, like so many bees unburdening themselves of their treasures. The orchestrion piped, and the bartender tossed fire back and forth between his glasses. A ruddy, red-shirted miner wagered 3 months of work. He showed everyone a raw lump of gold worth perhaps 5,000. He placed it on red. The band stopped. The house agreed. The roulette wheel spun, the ball skipping, and inevitably sucked still at black. The miner tore open his shirt. Strapped to his chest were a half-dozen smaller pouches of gold dust. "Again!" he shouted, and a roar rose up through the room. Through a gap in the crowd, Itzhak finally found the captain. He sat curled in the lap of the galloping cow, a so-called pretty waiter girl who preferred to pickpockets and was quite capable of throwing a grown man across the room. The captain was drunk, which made Itzhak's task easier, but his companion would want all the captain's money, never mind what he owed. "Thief!" a wild man cried out from behind the faro table. "Cheat!" The words were common in town, and many men turned expecting their punishment, but Itzhak stood still. He watched the captain's grand mustache, watched it ripple and curl with the rhythm of sleep. The mustache was a majestic creature. Itzhak had the perverse impulse to set it free. A hand roughed Itzhak's shoulder. A pistol was aimed not 3 feet from his chest. The sailor with the gun was so drunk that he seemed to be leaning forward as if climbing a great hill. The pistol was perfectly level. "I do not know you," said Itzhak. "You do," said the sailor. "Your mother does. You sold me these boots only last month." Itzhak looked down, and the crowd that had gathered looked down, and the captain snored on. The boots had lost their soles, their stitching, and one was missing the entire front third. Someone laughed. The sailor fired. Itzhak stumbled backward from the impact. Someone cried out. He turned to his left, slipped on something slick, but caught himself and stayed upright for once, the miracle of staying completely upright. The galloping cow shouted at first, her hands departing the captain's jacket. "This man is dead." Itzhak knew to leave without the money. Thanks.
This piece is called The Tyranny of Desire. No one knew where the app came from. It appeared on our phones, all of them, 50 days ago. Only 50 days ago. There was an outcry. We blamed the tech companies. The tech companies blamed each other. The Americans blamed the Russians. The Chinese blamed the Americans. We blamed radiation, vaccines, the Illuminati, the aliens. We blamed capitalism, higher education, the LHC, modernity, godlessness. We tweeted, made Medium accounts to post our think pieces, and had bitter arguments with strangers. We soon exhausted ourselves and settled down. The app could not be removed, but then again, it wasn't invasive as far as we could tell. It pushed no notifications, played no ads, did not even occupy home screen real estate. It was there if you looked for it, in the apps folder, a small gray heart among the apps that took us to the places we wanted to go, the apps that delivered us the food we wanted to eat, the apps that showed us the people we wanted to date. We tapped on the heart, and it opened to a black screen, a microphone icon, and red text. "What do you want?" "Love," we said. "Happiness. Freedom. Love, connection, respect, prestige, love." "Tell me more," it said. We told the app everything. In the night when we couldn't sleep, we'd go on long walks alone. We'd hide in bathrooms, whispering. The app became our diaries, our free therapy, our non-judgmental confidants. Feeling playful sometimes, we'd ask the app what it wanted, but it said nothing. The heart icons began turning from gray to red. First hundreds of us, then millions of us. We did not know what was going to happen. We did not know what we wanted to happen. We had spoken to it for billions of hours and in thousands of languages, and now we waited for it to speak back. We wanted to be told what to do. We wanted to be told how to be. We wanted to find our soulmates. We wanted to know, with certainty, what we actually wanted, distilled down as only AI could. Or we knew what we wanted, and wanted the permission to pursue it that only an algorithm could give. We speculated that we would soon be directed to the locations of our true loves. We cleared our schedules, asked about remote work. We began planning what to wear, what to say. We bought expensive wine. We speculated that we would begin to hear each other's recordings, anonymously or not, ushering in temporary conflict followed by eons of understanding. We speculated that the aliens were, even now, deciding if our species was worthy of survival. We created support groups for those of us whose art icons remained obstinately gray. We drafted bills that would make it illegal to enter into partnerships with anyone but your app-designated soulmates. We started saving to go back to school. We started exercising. We worked to become our best selves so that we'd be prepared to meet the rest of our lives. I woke up today and the app was gone. I've been in bed for hours, scrolling through the headlines, the tweets, the memes, trying to find a way out of this maze of betrayal, waiting for something to show me a freedom so terrifying I have no choice but to pursue it.
For Rockwall Winery, for Ina, for us all. Intruder, 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 intruder. Skyhawk, 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 skyhawk. Corsair, 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 corsair. Sky warrior, sky warrior, sky warrior. Having biked to Spirit Way, reliving what it was like, maneuvering huffy. Intruder, 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 intruder. Skyhawk, 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 skyhawk. Corsair, 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 corsair. Sky warrior, sky warrior, sky warrior. Parked outside of hangars, then roar of takeoff or propulsion testing, and above following the estuary to rooftop level, landing or in the bay, stallions rehearsing search and rescue or sweeping mines. Wingman to my side, talk to me, goose. Shifter moved to afterburner. We have decided so much safer are we as naval aviators ahead of epicenter and ground zero, foreign policy and cult of personality, school drama, and the fear of not growing up. How often was that mission to stay alive because the next issue of Penthouse in the stands of the mini-mart was a must-see, or the next issue of Playboy was a must-read in our flight first through squadrons awaiting maintenance. Now airfield abandoned to jackrabbits, ospreys, and lease turns, remnants of movie set and drag racing, flea market and antique fair. Hornet is now a museum, and some veterans, docents, and caretakers of her legacy would like her sunk. The ghost crew want their final rest, not entertaining history mystery night, nor hide in the shadows during the annual World Goth Festival. On behalf of a grateful nation, I would gladly donate the ship to the province of Zambales to be reefed for the marginalized and depleted fishery. Because there are not enough trawlers targeted for the practice, because spearfishing shipwrecks are touristic, because shoals are talking points to increase literal domain defense spending, because Falcons need representation too. Because opposing nations on the Security Council await for a stretched world power finally shrug commitments and freedoms to navigate. Because Subic is decades closed, Yokosuka is not close enough, Pearl Harbor is further away, and Alameda has nothing left to offer. Because Filipinos from the island off the coast of Oakland want to return home, and the fish are still large, and the fishermen without war stories. Because expats at the local VFW need confidence. They didn't serve a superpower only to see it cower, and testing anti-ship missiles on a World War II carrier within spyglass view of the horizon may be the necessary deterrence. Clink. But are they glad to see that day come? Goodbye undisturbed skyline disposed by base realignment and closure. From Rockwall Winery, survey Sailforce's world's tallest condom. If only the Master Chief could behold the ribbed broadsides and see the Battlestar Galactica's likeness, but Benioff is no veteran of Cylon Wars, and the coming attack is no surprise nor false flag. And the Leaning Tower of San Francisco nearing 4 feet from its axis, vacant, celebrity tenants, and new money duped to soar above the mission. And when it falls, what shipyard would recycle the steel into the keel of the USS San Francisco, and whose sparkling wine smashes against the bow? But what a privilege when Blue Angels fly by like X-Wings descending on Death Star, to those who cheer and those who shudder, from hotel skyboxes, from picnics and outdoor concerts, from luxury yachts flexing with parade of warships. And all the emptied bases, crowds reclaim their pride. The Empire launched from here, and would that crowd recognize that history walking under the shadow of Dewey's monument in Union Square, or McKinley in the Panhandle? Alas, competitive hubris, short-lived, would have learned a lesson on power projection from the Enterprise and the Carl Vinson. Deployment is not for the weak. And I have skipped tiger cruises and wished for deep ocean because dryland drowning is not just pulmonary edema from chemical warfare. If ever, the unfavorable winds, as boot camp taught, but island fever, a shaft of atropine cannot prevent. How many wives poured wine to solace and independence, as I have poured sacramental wine as altar boy at the base chapel, sampling before the Mass. Or when the ships creep back, for what happens overseas stays overseas, widows toast reunion or submission, as I have appreciated sacramental wine as altar boy at the base chapel, smoother than the returning Master Chief's Olympia or Schlitz. Closer to the shore at edge of runway, the VA clinic and columbarium, delayed because sanctuary cities are least preferred, but we are no longer concerned for the wounded or the dead, or their final resting place, nor the politicians who return to office. The tides will eventually offer a burial at sea. By that time, the demand will be so high and not enough made in America U.S. flags, and who will fire the salvos? The militias bunkered in the Sierras, or law enforcement? A more sobering activity than shooting looters because rubber bullets are a hopeless deterrent. Instead, salutes foresight. Alameda's base reuse department, when remediation stalled housing development and infrastructure rebuild dismayed biotech and internet startup, permit vanguard of urban vinters. And those who follow to claim properties rise glasses to the sun, tracking the peninsula, nothing solemn, define. Oh, peppered and clove raspberry compote with ginger finish, or arugula black olive melange, or plua and bay leaf, rub baseball glove, or desert fig with artisan mined Himalayan rock salt, or koi watermelon stirred by copy paper cut index finger, or Victorian asphodel rhymed with North Coast spruce tips. In another time, a condo overlooking the new ferry terminal is a fine investment, shared in the mind of that couple over there, filtered in globules of clarified butter with a figment of cardamom or the rattan couch, where an F-18 or F-35 would strike a pose had the U.S. Navy not reconcentrated carrier groups to Everett and San Diego. The fuel of one's jet sortie eclipsing my student loan, outstanding in perpetual deferral. Gladly this day ends the monthly reminder the stock market anticipates crude shortage, and National Guard are recalled from fighting fires will not have time to redeploy to cities. They should be told that developers reduce the percentage of mandated low-income units because Cold War amnesia is priceless, and Fleet Week collides with Oktoberfest, and prime real estate usher the reduction of the uniform Filipino. And so yes, there is added value, unlike the condos in San Francisco, neighborly with tent cities and transit terminal gauntlet of needling addicts have no shelter here. And escaping to wine country, the narrow passage denied state funds to widen less desirable. When in walking distance, all is needed a spa, because Seaplane Lagoon is still radioactive. What further damage can a spaceport? How fast to leave the ideal home? Then again, where would they go? Would you watch the only seconds of the war you will ever see stuck in traffic? A car ferry servicing Seaplane Lagoon, a nice touch, an escape route through the Delta, alas, not in the redevelopment budget, to shorten trip to slopes when the lottery off-planet fails to produce a seat. Those who remain on the point are in their balconies, surrounded by memories and soon-to-be artifacts, while others glad that the winery announced resisting Armageddon. Let's not let the wine go to waste. A survey before the doors open asks, music or no music, because instead of pinging countdowns, disable alerts, a soundtrack is suggestible at eve of destruction. I didn't need any more new updates, pinging failures of diplomacy, pinging rumors of backroom cajoling, pinging call-ups and redevelopments and deployments detailed, pinging pollsters registering likelihoods of localized conflict or world war and the death toll among combatants and the collateral, pinging domestic squabbles of showing not enough strength or showing too much, pinging the families left behind at the piers, pinging the price of gas climbing, pinging the groceries overrun, who hoards toilet paper before a nuclear war, pinging Home Depot is selling out of plywood and nails, do I need a nail gun? Pinging Big Five is all out of ammo. Pinging some rockets may not launch in time. Pinging some rockets have failed to launch. Pinging some rockets are on their way. Clink. Those fragile prismatic stems betray the stillness I haven't seen at the point since Reagan outlawed the Soviet Union, after Master Chief drove off to meet the Carl Vinson, because admirals and generals were not laughing, because it only takes 30 minutes for a nuclear warhead launched from the Soviet Union to reach the United States, because even that was not enough time to recall the crew and set sail, because while the Kremlin decides how to proceed with Reagan's tongue-in-cheek, there was still time to clear the Golden Gate, gain distance from Garland of ground zeros. Because a serviceman's call to duty, he cannot look back. Because his heart belonged to the sea, belonged to the Navy. In those last minutes, I searched the sky, multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, or wait for the Olympics to pulse from programming. Are we to thank the politics of military allocation bracketing the Bay Area from nuclear assault? Is this what winning the Cold War feels like? Greening runways, the subtleties of the military-industrial complex sublimated into web and social media are hardly overlooking. The redeeming qualities of such apps to sustain leadership and acquire and transmit intelligence has not eliminated the range. Would I then subscribe to TikTok because the last country standing? Produce content, how to collect nuclear fallout, dancing and revealing radiation suit because slow tempo of acids beleaguer public attention. But notice the mustering of forces when C41 fails and Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, when weaponized our decentralized targets. Are we so glad to have the front row? How to like this? Rockwall's Petite Syrah or Sangiovese taste like plowshares. I want jet fuel and nostalgia, mudflat and trepidation, row from herring caught from Encinel's lagoon and radium sediment, the certainty of mutual assured destruction fragile at tongue's tip and smooth resignation both sides will lose. But who am I kidding? I can't close my eyes, war descends, and I am too old to be reactivated for duty. Peace.
Nikki Nax was in love with a demon. Not just any demon, but one of her clients. Nikki worked as a necromancer for the Demon Protection Program, which provided human hosts for demons to inhabit, making it easier for them to blend in the human realm. If demons were to roam the earthly streets in their true forms, they would stick out like a Mormon at a strip club and would be easy pickings for angels or bounty hunters. Like most workplaces, it was against policy to get emotionally attached to a client. It not only put the client at risk, but the whole DPP as well. If the location were to be discovered by angels, it would put a lot of witches and warlocks out of work. But there was just something about Azarath that made her feel all tingly inside. His black, leathery lizard-like skin, his deep blood-red eyes, his perfectly smooth set of ram horns adorning the sides of his head, not to mention his monstrous biceps. He was a demonic hunk. So much so that her co-workers dubbed him Demon McDreamy. Azarath was also a repeat customer for the DPP. He never seemed able to keep his host alive longer than 3 months. Exorcisms were still the main way demons lost their hosts, but there were also demon slayers and bounty hunters, as well as the rare angel abduction. Azarath, however, had a propensity to cause his host to be killed by jealous lovers or cheated partners. Luckily, his promiscuous behavior flew under the radar of angels, as not every Lothario is a demon in disguise. For Nikki, though, what he did when under the guise of a human didn't matter to her. She was into him as a demon, and it wasn't all about his physique. He was nice to her. Which is saying a lot because most demons treated their necromancers like shit. A means to an end. Azarath was different. He was a gentlemanly demon, if there ever was such a thing, and not in the same scheming manner demons used to seduce their victims. Azarath's behavior seemed sincere. He was kind and considerate to her from their very first time they met nearly 2 years ago. Azarath had stepped into her office after his last host was shot to death 5 times, 2 in the head and 3 in the crotch to be exact, by the human's fiercely flustered wife who had caught him in bed with not 1, but 2 women, one of them her own sister. At the time, Nikki was relatively new to the job, only 12 transactions under her belt. So far, all her clients had been pompous assholes who believed they were the next Nero or Belial, or even Lord Lucifer himself. When she first laid lies on Az as he tried to gracefully get his large frame into her office, she nearly swooned over his demonic good looks. She hadn't met a demon as attractive as Azarath since, well, ever. Most of her clients were scrawny, weaselly demons. Azarath introduced himself, gently cupping his bear-sized hand under hers, and kissed it. His voice was deep and smooth like chocolate. Nikki was taken aback and stood there mesmerized by the back of her hand. Azarath, realizing the effect on her, scoffed and cracked a toothy grin. Hey, doll, I don't want to break up your little fantasy, but I'm kind of itching to get back out there. I get such a rush bringing havoc to human lives. She was too enamored by his voice to have heard what he said, so she simply nodded. She found it difficult to stay professional during a moment in incantation when she had to stand inches away from him and paint a pentagram on his chest. He sensed this and started up a conversation, which was rare during transactions. Usually if demons said anything at all, it would be about them. They'd be talking more at her than with her. Azarath was different because he wanted to get to know her. Ever since then, as Nikki would prepare for the transaction, the two of them would talk. On his 4th visit, after spotting her Emily Lestrange decaled Stratocaster in the corner of her office, she told him that she played guitar in a synth dark pop metal band. She wanted to tell him the name of her band and where they played, but knew that would put them at risk. Running into each other in the outside world was a big no-no. Things got spicy when they broached the subject of love. He walked through her door and addressed her as darling, nodding his head and flashing his pearly whites. Laying buck naked and unconscious on her fainting couch was his new human host, a tattooed 30-something male with enough grease in his hair to cause an oil spill. A piece of duct tape covered his mouth and a leopard print eye mask was strapped over his eyes. Nikki smiled as she was being called darling. She was standing over the host, clutching a bowl full of red paint. Nice buns, Az said, nearly causing Nikki to drop the whole bowl onto the host. What? Oh, sorry, I meant your hair, Az clarified, twirling his index finger over his head. Nikki had her hair done up in 2 buns. Right, yeah, thanks. You like it? She asked, smiling ear to ear. It was uncommon to hear a demon apologize for anything. Yeah, they remind me of baby horns. Baby horns? Huh, I never really thought about demon babies, she said, trying to imagine Az as a baby. What, you think we come out looking like this? Nikki shrugged her shoulders before returning her attention to Az's new host, who had signed his soul away so his new startup would make millions. She began painting the procedural pentagram over the host's heart. I bet you were a cute baby, she told him, smiling. You'd be right, he replied, chuckling. But enough about me. You're the cute one here. I bet you get tons of guys fighting over you, especially since you're a rock star and all. She laughed at the notion of being called a rock star. Yeah, not so much. So you've never got it on with a fan? No, Az, I have not. I like our fans, but not that much. So what you're telling me is that you're single. Yeah, she replied, raising an eyebrow. But I don't mind being single. I just haven't found the right one yet. Ah, you're one of those, Az said, cackling and throwing his arms in the air. You humans with your absurd concept of love. Nikki felt her stomach clench. How could she be so stupid to believe that a demon would believe in love? Azarath looked down at her and sniffed the air. He could smell the sadness on her. Ah, crap, he muttered to himself. Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to burst your bubble. It's that whole concept of finding your soulmate makes me laugh. But don't listen to me, I'm a demon. Leave the lovey stuff to the angels. Nikki pretended to gag, which made Az chuckle. This was the second time he apologized to her. If she could make him apologize, she could make him believe in love. They locked eyes briefly, but she quickly looked down into the bowl of red paint, cleared her throat, and avoided eye contact before saying, Let's, get going. I'm sure you're aching to get back out there. Az grunted and scratched his chest. He looked like he wanted to apologize further, but couldn't quite find the words. Nikki stepped before him, dabbed the brush, and painted a corresponding pentagram over Azrath's hard, turtle shell-like chest. He cracked his toothy grin, which Nikki had grown to love since his first visit. Once the transaction of souls was complete, Nikki swiftly removed the duct tape and blindfold before the host started grasping for air and shot open his eyes, which turned blood red before quickly reverting back to a normal shade of brown. Azrath let out a celebratory yell, which dissolved into an evil cackle. Azrath clenched his new fist, cracked his new neck, and shot to his feet. Azrath and his new human host stood naked in front of Nikki. Oh, it feels so good, Azrath moaned, his voice slowly shifting to the host's voice. He looked over his new body and admired its muscle and toned physique. He looked down at his new host's cock and cupped it. You, my friend, are going to get a lot of action, he laughed, as he looked back up to see Nikki, flushed in the face. Oh, sorry about that. It's okay. You said the same thing to your last two hosts, she said, trying to keep her eyes focused on Azrath's new face. Did I? Well, don't hold it against me, he said, as he ran his hands down his abs. And hey, I'll tell you what, I still feel bad about what I said earlier. I never want to hurt your feelings, Nikki. You're my favorite witch. Nikki's eyes lit up. Not only had he called her by her name, but he also called her his favorite witch. She was so ecstatic yet so unprepared for what he said next. So here, I'm going to let you kick me in the balls. He opened his legs and pressed his hands against the back of his head. It's the least I can do. I deserve it. I hurt you, so you hurt me. It's only fair. What? No, Az, I'm not going to do that. Aw, come on, I know you want to. I really don't. Love doesn't exist. Az, come on, just put these clothes on, okay? She laughed, holding out a folded stack of the host's clothes. Not until you do it. Come on, I can take it, he said, snorting. He then began swinging his hips. Oh, for crying out loud, Az. Fine. Nikki let out a breath, lined up her boot to his balls, and let him have it. She hadn't gotten around to telling him that she played soccer back in her grade school days. Az keeled over and winced in agony. You got some kick there, kid. Nikki shook her head and laughed before helping him up to his feet. You are something else, Az, I swear. It was worth it. Got you in a better mood, didn't it? He said, grinning. New body, same grin. Nikki rolled her eyes and threw the clothes at him. As Azarath got dressed, Nikki grabbed him in a little folder. Okay, Az, here's your new identity. Look it over and learn it. And, well, enjoy your new host. And, it kind of seems pointless to get to tell you this, but can you try to stay out of trouble this time? You know that ain't gonna happen, sweetheart, he said, glancing over the file. He stopped before exiting and turned to face Nikki. You know, I meant what I said. You are my favorite witch, and I have no doubt that you'll find your mate. He tapped his fingers against the door, winked, and cracked that sexy grin before walking out the door. At the end of the workday, Nikki was waiting for Terry to finish flirting with Agnes, the young new receptionist. Terry Starlight not only was her co-worker, but was her best friend and bandmate. They made up one half of Cardinal Sin. They also had a show tonight. Hey, Terry, come on, we're running late. Just a sec, hon. I was just telling dear Agnes here about Demon McDreamy. What? Are you freaking serious? Chill out, Nicky Knack. Agnes wouldn't tell a soul, huh? Terry leaned over the receptionist's desk, revealing some unnecessary workplace cleavage, and ran her tongue around her lips. Agnes shook her head, her eyes entranced by Terry. Jesus, Terry, you're such a... But before Nikki could utter another word, Terry pressed her finger against Nikki's lips. Listen, babe, he's a sexy beast, I'll give you that. But you know that he's just like every other demon, right? He's not into us witches. She ran her finger down Nikki's chin before sticking it into her mouth and sucking it. Agnes let out a little moan. And I've been telling you, Terry, that Az is not like any other demon. He's better, and I think he is into me. And there's a moment today where I swear we could have kissed. Ugh, Nikki, your romanticism is seriously killing my buzz. Sorry, Agnes. Guess we'll just have to pick this up tomorrow. Terry blew Agnes a kiss. Okay, Nikki, I don't want to hear anything more about Az tonight. Got it? Good. Let's rock. Nikki rolled her eyes and followed Terry out the door. They had just gone through performing a rollicking rendition of Black Sabbath's Paranoid when Nikki noticed a couple make their way to the middle of the crowd. It almost seemed like the crowd parted for them. The lights blocked her from getting a clear look at them, but there was no mistaking it. The guy was a demon. There was a pulsating red aura emanating around him, as well as a strong odor of fire and brimstone. Nikki just had an inkling it was Az. But before they started the next song, Nikki gathered the others to confer around the drum kit and whispered, "There's a demon in the crowd." "Yeah, we have noses too, Nikki, so what?" "I have a really bad feeling that it's Az." "Are you for real right now?" "Nikki, you didn't tell him about tonight, did you?" "Of course not." This small break in the music caused the house lights to come back on, which broke the little spout up and made the crowd's faces visible. They were all staring up at the stage, wondering what the hell was going on, and Nikki's fears were verified as she recognized Azrath's new host body. Azrath locked eyes with Nikki, cocked his head, mouthed her name, and delivered his trademark toothy grin. Suddenly, a bright burst of light filled the raven's nest, blinding everybody, causing them to cower and cover their eyes. As Nikki shielded her eyes, the room filled up with the overpowering aroma of sage, and she could hear what sounded like wings flapping. When the light dissipated, Azrath was gone. "Was that what I think it was?" asked Terry. Nikki's body went limp, and she fell to her knees. "Abducted. He's been abducted."
There was a hole in the floor. Bubbles flushed from gills, the head of the slithering behemoth bigger than a school bus. Its eyes were gloomy pits boring into an otherwise blemishless face. It swims from the catacomb of the ocean. It lives within a relic of a sinful era. Children move on either side. They are much smaller. They don't read, they don't speak, only swim alongside their beautiful parent, that sentinel from below. The crash of serpents flew from the enormous stone doors like fireworks from an archaic cannon. That doesn't matter. This matters. A lazy boat sat on a still surface. Surfers cascaded in a white wake under a gray Pacific sky. An old man angled his fishing rod within his bucket at the edge of the wake. The seagulls moved in a storm, a cyclone of feathers, squawking, and garbage. "Can you tell me why?" Alondra asked him. The man was staring at the birds, the few beams of Californian sun putrefying his bare chest. He had a Burt Reynolds mustache and long prayer beads draped around his earthen neck. "No," he said. Alondra nodded and looked at the water. Her belly was poking out from under her acid-washed crop top. She rested a hand on her stomach and asked, Do you know why? Why you would leave your wife like this? The seagulls moved in a storm, a cyclone of feathers, squawking, and garbage. He was staring at the birds, a million shards of glass in his wartime brain. He had a denim jacket on the sand dune next to him and a fake ID. No, he said. Well, maybe I should go then, Alondra nodded, sighing as she stood. I'll be fine anyway. Dad would have hated this, he thought. A pregnant woman abandoned by her guy. It's not the king's style. Monosyllabic from you, she asked. The ragged man looked up at her. She was like a zeppelin. The seagulls were in a typhoon. I'm sorry, he said. I have a secret. Alondra laughed. She doubled over and snorted, the worst kind of laugh. At least you have a secret. She wiped a tear from her mascara eye. All I have is a bag to pack. Back to Kentucky? That's right. Stevie has a house for me and Mom. We'll be all right without your patriarchal ass. Good. Alondra slapped him hard in the mouth, reaching down to where he sat. She had words boiling behind her teeth, but she let her eyes and hand do the mangling instead. Goodbye, secret man, Alondra said. She coursed up the beach, away from him, taking staggering steps like a sidewinder. He sat in the dune, a sandy table with no one left to eat with. It took him an hour to move. There was a tremor inside him that rocked and shook like a leathered willow. A tremendous fear captured his body, shells blasting on either shoulder. Finally, he stood. The sun peeked between the clouds. He slung his denim jacket over his frame, like it was his, and walked into the water. The ocean parted, kissed his feet, and made a place for him inside the curls. He walked until he must have swam. Pufferfish and sun sharks coursed through and around the journeyer as he swam. He couldn't tell where he was going. It was so dark. Only that some white light around his neck was pulling him down. It was the same light that kept him from Alondra, from fatherhood. It could not be helped. The waves hushed as its body ached through the currents. Selfish deeds slithered in the water as the deity swam toward the man. He floated in front of the behemoth like a mote to the sun. He looked at its wide head, the eyelessness of its face, and let the echoes of his time spent away immolate within him. It was like the fantastic snake knew he was burning and its tremendous power waited. The two beings held each other like it had been too long, though the man had never been this deep, and the monster hadn't risen so high in such a long time. He swam near the creature's eye. The two of them looked at each other, the man burning and the snake rocking back and forth, waiting. Its gills pounded water, so much that Secret Man could feel the tug. His beads guided him along the deistic body toward those organic valves. Then he kept swimming. He left the monster's gaze and it bellowed a loud roar. All the fish and rays and sharks in the shallow water flew from the terrible noise. But Secret Man paddled his hand in front of him, windmilling toward it all and under the enormity. The creature didn't move, just rocked gently, and the little plants growing on its bodies rushed in the water. He moved through honey, charting his suit of air further down. It was impossible to be this deep. To reach this depth is never wanted. But he knew he had to go. The keeper of the door, the origin of the secret, called. He gripped his prayer beads, the ones he found in the terraces, the ones he found in the rubble, the ones he found in the ashes of error. They were luminescent green with brown tassels, darker this low in the ocean. The catacomb of the ocean was a forgotten maw to an old and angry world. It was a cleave in the rim of the planet, a portal in the Pacific. Like the slow roll of an abacus stone, the sunken god turned and watched Secret Man swim. Pounds of ocean seeped in its agape teeth, miles of cleansing water. The tiny dot of sun above the man left him. He looked over his shoulder, in that dark place between moments, and saw the etched outline of the eel god, the pallor of its crepuscular eyes keeping a harbor. He wasn't sure it was for him. He wasn't sure that torch would light the way back. He had a secret, an unwanted one. 2 ornate doors as thick as tanks guarded a dark entry. Each door was gold, inlaid with opal, amethyst, turquoise, ruby, sapphire, bismuth, and every other treasure the Spanish hoarders lost in the storms they earned. His lone frame skated closer to the mouth of the door, a shiny ghost in a realm of darkness. A few fish, down too far for their own good, looked at him and thought he was a descendant angel in process. There came upon Secret Man a vacuuming, and just as he thought to stick an arm toward the gloom, the mountains of madness he was born from, somewhere near Stockton, scoured from behind. The secret man shot through the doors like melody from a sparrow song. A frog's croak kicked his ears and brought him to life. He opened his eyes and felt like a child in the backseat of a car, numb to the expanse of travel until it had long been over. He stood on the bank of some purple and gold place, swollen in ugly clouds overhead, but within him a peace he had never known. The great god swam in the Pacific, back behind those royal doors. It channeled itself like a mastodon born in a lagoon. Seagulls moved in a storm, a cyclone of feathers, squawking and garbage. Secret Man left his waist at the surf, and he began to walk in this new land. He saw his son in front of him, and he remembered his father, time stretching in both directions. A fishing line of pain was also in front of him, in this strange new place, and his secret made an appearance each inch of the way.
This is called Zola Was Here. Amelia stepped out of the time machine into a college bar called the Town Pump on March 18th, 1998, the night of her rape. Amelia looked with disdain at the name, pulling her sweater over her shoulders and crossing her arms. She hoped that in her own time this place had burned to the ground. The bar was warmly lit with a beery amber tone from the overhead lights and wall sconces. It was a converted chain diner with the booths ripped out and replaced with a sticky-floored cluster of tables for people to drink pitchers of beer. The bell over the door rang with every group of chattering students coming in out of the cold. Snow melted in puddles on the warped laminate, and the music was a rotating selection of Limp Bizkit, Foreigner, and Garth Brooks. It smelled like pizza and bleach, and the bartenders looked haggard, pouring pitcher after pitcher of Miller High Life. The idea had come to her in a therapy session, virtually, laid out in her own couch in her own apartment, processing the aimlessness and flexible sense of self. Sometimes I try to dig down to the core of myself and it feels like there's nothing there. Just cobwebs and dead moths and old boxes waiting to be broken down, Amelia had said. Her therapist's microphone kept cutting out, and he said, "When was a time you felt like yourself and what happened to change it?" And here she stood, watching a college night unfold from her past. Amelia was the oldest person in the bar by easily 15 years. Even the bartenders capped out at maybe 25. She felt both extremely on display and invisible amongst the loud conversations and wild gestures aided by the jukebox and beer. In the back corner of the bar, near the gas fireplace that still had Christmas garlands up around it, sat the woman she had come for. Amelia looked at her younger self, 21, reading a book in a noisy bar. She stopped to compare them both. Younger Amelia had a blunt bob and bangs dyed magenta, nails painted black, and shredded cuticles. And she lined her lips and then coated them in cherry chapstick. Amelia, as the present self, had stopped dyeing her hair, now just a brown ponytail with swirls of gray poking through. It seemed more sensible. The clothes had changed from torn fishnets and Converse to sensible shoes, Clark's, like her mother, and button-up shirts hidden under a layer of cardigan. She dressed conservative and sensibly, telling herself that that's what time did to everyone. But that was correlation, not causation. Really, it was just about creating barriers. And then there was the general quiet that had settled in, the boldness that had been eaten by the monster of wisdom. Whereas 21-year-old Amelia was bright and loud against the contrast of Junko jeans and oversized jerseys and polos. She even had little butterfly clips in her hair. She remembered how really liberating it had been when she was in college, being able to dress and adorn herself outside of how she had looked in high school. Amelia snaked through the crowd of drunks to sit at the hearth next to the pink-haired Amelia with a book blooming in her lap like a flower. "Bit of a rowdy night, huh?" Amelia shouted over the din. "Mind if I sit down?" "Oh, of course," young Amelia said, breaking eye contact with the words of Zola. She held Nana in her hands, and Amelia remembered the year that she had read only Zola, and how she could never read him again after tonight, and how she had a panic attack at the Cezanne exhibit staring at his portrait. She felt like such incredible remorse, like she owed this Amelia an apology. I'm sorry I let you give up on this. It was just too hard. Amelia felt a panic attack coming on now. The room was hot and confining, and she felt the tick of the clock. She had to beat the time when he showed up, and when young Amelia would feel flattered enough to get in his car. He came out of nowhere, stone sober, and Amelia scanned the room now, expecting him to attack. But that's not where all this happens. It happens outside, alone for a smoke. Amelia now had a running count of things she didn't do anymore. Read Zola, dye her hair, withstand the print of fishnets on the back of her thighs, smoke cloves. Granted, there was a lot she was relieved to not have quite so much of. She looked down at younger Amelia's decomposing Van slip-ons and thought, someday you're going to have to spend a fortress on a mattress because you want to be able to fill in the checks with pink marker. I used to really love Zola too, Amelia said, and young Amelia made direct and curious eye contact. Amelia wasn't used to that now. She'd pretty much managed to avoid being seen. But young Amelia didn't have headphones to hide in or a cell phone to suddenly look something up on. She was open, shiny-faced, and Amelia felt ancient and alien in comparison to her. Really? I'm trying to read everything he ever wrote, including the Dreyfus Affair stuff, young Amelia said in a voice a little too loud and a little too fast. Amelia flinched in her nakedness, the eagerness of youth and pure passion that now felt like staring into the sun. Everything was new and the best or completely disastrous. She still had the ability to love things earnestly. I'm Amelia, Amelia said without thinking. She blanched red and kicked herself for not coming up with a fake name. Amelia, Chardonnay. Panicked was an understatement, and now Amelia secretly hoped that she was far more naive than she remembered so that she didn't catch on. Oh, hey, that's my name too. In fact, you look familiar. Have we met before? You look a lot like my mom. Ouch, you little shit, Amelia thought. She had not expected to find young Amelia to be so dazzling and young and somehow still just young. Young Amelia bounced with enthusiasm that had long left current Amelia. She guessed that she was old Amelia now. 45 had started to set in sharp and fine, and now Amelia looked at herself and saw the heavy burden of youth weighed down upon her like a butterfly pinned to a board. Small world. And you like Zola. I feel like this was fate. Do you go here? Teach here? Young Amelia had closed the book and began to tuck it into her bag. Amelia had the brains come up with a backstory and the quick breaths between young Amelia's words. I'm an adjunct in the literature department. I haven't cracked a book since college. I'm really passionate about the work of Balzac. Read like an excerpt of one of his books and nothing else, and I'm not entirely sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. Amelia felt like a disappointment as she churned out the story. Sorry, kid. You just grew up to be another woman with no direction and a lot of regrets, who corners a tech mogul at a conference and lets him think that you'd fund his project if he lets you try his machine. The disappointment she felt in her day-to-day life now magnified in the face of her younger self. She really had no idea if she would be impressed or felt an overwhelming desire to impress her. They stayed for an hour. Amelia watched the clock on the wall as it got closer and closer to 2:13 a.m. Young Amelia was sipping a Miller High Life, another thing old Amelia was glad to have left behind. Old Amelia listened as young Amelia discussed her classes, her major, her dreams, and the boy she liked and was going to meet tonight. He's my professor, young Amelia said, full of excitement and delicate shame that she couldn't hide at all. I know, old Amelia said. What? Young Amelia leaned her ear closer to old Amelia to hear better. I said, go on. Old Amelia sipped on a red wine that tasted like it had been left in a hot car. But he didn't show up, and I've been hanging out here hoping he'll walk through the door like an idiot, and I actually finished my book and started reading it over again. Old Amelia had forgotten this, had forgotten the yearning. Is he cute? Young Amelia blushed so hard that she matched her hair. So cute, and he's like so smart and so funny. Old Amelia was also glad to be rid of thinking men were smart and funny. She slowly started trying to usher young Amelia towards the door. In her memory, young Amelia would go out for a smoke at 2:13 a.m. He would pull up in his distinguished matte black jalopy, and then everything gets out of hand. Amelia had given this experience so many euphemisms over the years depending on the audience. The incident with her parents. Shit that happened to her friends. And to the police, well, that was lost to time. It triggered sensation of extreme cold, but no words. I'm heading back to campus, Amelia lied. Want to ride the bus together? The last bus stopped soon. They needed to leave now. The rapist had a name. It was generic. Because of course it was. Dan. He wasn't a stranger or even an acquaintance, but an older graduate student who was teaching her French literature class. The morning after the incident, he would make crepes in class to discuss Proust. He was shiny and impressive, and every time Amelia bit into a Madeleine, she longed to hear bones cracking, shattering spine, and the dislodge of teeth and jaw. He would take her to this place, and she wouldn't have the words to question, and it got complex from there. That's what everyone who had heard it had called it. Complex. Layered. She wanted so much to be special. Yeah, it's getting late, isn't it? I should just give up. Message received. Amelia heard his voice in her head. I feel so comfortable around you. You're so brilliant in class. You make teaching so worthwhile. What's the problem? Relax. If it's any consolation, I would have killed to go on a date with you. And I think you're a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for. Young Amelia actually looked like she might cry. Old Amelia had rewritten herself in her mind as tough, sarcastic, no nonsense. But she saw just how much nonsense had been heaped on her and how little affirmation it took to change her. What's your dorm again? Young Amelia got up and followed Amelia to the front of the bar, which had gotten quieter. People had started to leave, and the people that were going to get non-verbally drunk had brought a hush over the room. The time was 2 a.m. on the dot, according to the wall clock. Amelia felt the first nagging heft of doubt. She had charged into this, convinced the world that this would change everything, and maybe it would, but she examined her life with a new, more precious tone. What if this didn't change anything? What if she was more than just a list of things that had been done to her? Was the way out also the way in, no matter what you did? Amelia looked at her younger self, and all she wanted to do was throw herself between her and the world, prolong the time of the world's wonder. Amelia knew she couldn't prevent something like this forever, that there would be more opportunities, but tonight she just wanted to know she had tried. While Amelia deliberated in her mind and young Amelia bounced on the balls of her feet, a car pulled up and parked in the shadows. In the split second, Amelia pulled young Amelia towards the parking lot, towards the bus stop. Amelia looked over her shoulder and watched Dan get out of the car and light a cigarette. Relax. The bus pulled up to the stop, and older Amelia dumped the contents of her pockets onto the change box. It was 8 pennies, a quarter, and 4 dimes, and this amount magically let her pass. It was 8 miles to campus from the bar, which meant the ride was easily 45 minutes of stopping and starting. Amelia let young Amelia ramble about French literature and nodded and smiled. Amelia remembered trying to feel grown up, cultured, especially about books. She had only read the classics and required reading in high school, bragged that her favorite books were by Anais Nin, Kafka, and Nabokov, despite only having read their most famous and commonly assigned works. She was trying so damn hard. They approached the dorm, Werder, that's what it was called. The markers were foggy but familiar. She picked it because it was the art dorm and hoped it would be filled with Parisian painters, but it turned out to be filled with clammy, drunk, and hapless people who reflected her own imposter syndrome back to her. Amelia started to unclench. She'd pulled it off. Young Amelia would now be safe in her dorm, relatively, for the time being. Young Amelia turned towards Amelia and began fiddling with the borrowed sweater. It's really late, and campus gets really iffy at night. Do you want to come up? Amelia paused. This was not how she had seen this going. She wasn't even sure she was reading this correctly. You mean like spend the night? Yeah, we could talk more about books, and you can crash in my bunk if you want. Amelia's heart welled up as young Amelia's advances. She had the awkwardness of somebody who had made a choice, but didn't know how to start it. Amelia carried that now. No idea how to start sex or end conversations. Some things never change. Are you sure? Amelia asked. She'd forgotten how casual sex worked. She'd been crude at it, but relatively devoted to the practice. And another thing she'd toppled into in college and then toppled out of after it. She didn't go on a date for 2 years. Yeah, I'd like to come up. Young Amelia's roommate was absent, and Amelia remembered her to be one of those people with boyfriends off campus. The dorm shared the bar's chintziness, and Amelia's memories were instantly filled with every time she found someone passed out drunk in front of the door, and the smell of rotting food. The curtains were thick and scratchy with flame retardant that would probably give you cancer anyway. Young Amelia's fingers dug into the cuffs of the sweater, and she said, "I'm not sure what happens now," and giggled nervously. "Do you want me to kiss you?" Amelia said over the throb of memory, repeating, "Relax, relax, relax." Young Amelia went for it, pressed her identical mouth to Amelia's, and Amelia reached back and flipped the light switch so that the scalding overhead lights turned off and the room was only lit by the orange lights from the parking lot. Old Amelia could immediately read all the things young Amelia tried to cover in her insecurities. Get naked fast, get under the covers, tuck your arms in to appear smaller, kiss a lot to prevent them looking at you. She spent time running her fingertips over the parts Amelia was protective of, pulling out anxieties long forgotten and trying to address them, slowing down young Amelia's rush, pulling away so that they had to look at each other, even in the dark. She wanted Amelia to see that she wanted to be there. She tried to not compare their bodies, to not pine for past self, but to just enjoy herself, both herselves, and make that as contagious as possible. Young Amelia laughed and shook and moaned, and old Amelia smiled, enjoying her. They clung to each other in Amelia's small, uncomfortable bed, sharing their single flat pillow. At 5:45 a.m., Amelia caught the first bus back to the bar, smelling like the perfume she wore in college, and got back into the time machine. When she arrived in her own time, she exited the machine into a Paris street. Her lungs filled with the smell of bread. People were loudly talking on cell phones and tripping on dog leashes. Her reflection in the window of the nearest cafe showed her hair was long, but now a deep shade of red. Her sweater was a richer color, largely unaltered, but no longer unassuming. The khakis had melted away to fishnets and swirling skirts. Her shoes were cute, but she was happy to see that they still aged into something kinder on her feet. Some things were different, and some things were the same. She had tattoos of French phrases and Riot Girl lyrics, and she recognized her mother in her reflection. Just a little happier. She smiled back at herself and headed up the brick alleyway towards the place she knew was home. Thank you.
Oh, God. Thank you guys so much for Club Chicxulub. I just want to say thank you to our performers. Mr. Ryan Sloan with the Hotel Argonaut. LeeAnn Perry, the Tyranny of Desire. Sean Labrador Manzano, Rockwall Winery. Casey Bennett in his reading debut, the first time, a demonic love story. Bicchieri, Secret Lords. There he is. Lauren Parker, Zola was here. And of course, our synth lord, Bhat. My lovely co-host, Ms. Lauren C. Johnson. My name is Matt Carney. Thank you for coming. Please tip your performers. We have a tip jar going around. That's going to come in. It's a little house. You can't miss it. It's a little house. You can't miss a little house. Submissions reopen April 1st for Club Chicxulub II. Thank you for Angela and Stas at DecoDance, this bar. So please drink more and tip liberally. Carl Sagan said, I will leave you with this. For small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. Thank you all for coming.